Everyone's looking fridgy. I have now. Just in cases.
We're live?
Yep.
Well then,
Looks
people
like
of the
it.
internet. I heard myself over on Matt's phone. Welcome to the Genus Brewing live stream. For those of you who are new to this, we're going to go over some Genus Brewing or general beer news for a little bit while we wait for people to log on. Then we're going to jump into a style of the week and then talk about a topic, which today's isn't really a secret, but we're going to go over some brewing secret, some professional brewing hacks, hot tips for $5 footlongs.
Hacks may not be the best word for that anymore. Apparently, young people, hacks means masturbation. So,
Oh,
FYI,
well, if you're going for a hazy, I guess.
could make it a little creamy.
Genus Brewing news. What all we got new going on this week?
Well, you wouldn't know it because our media guy failed when I told him to do his job. But we had Reese's Puff happen this week. That got released on National Reese's Day. Barely managed to get the barrel aged on there too over some other breweries' beers. But we got them both on there, and they're on tap now. So both versions of Reese's Puff are here and ready to drink.
Reese's
That's
Puff.
pretty awesome.
Yeah, National Reese's Day, by the way, was the 17th, right?
18th.
18th. Yeah, we got Reese's Puff cereal porter and the barrel aged version from was that last year or 2 years ago?
That was 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Last year's was a year old out of the barrel. So, well, technically it's a year and a half ago because we switched it from October to May. But, you know, it was 2 versions ago.
2 versions ago. Well, we also got a new fence up. I don't know if you guys have been to Spokane, but if you have and you're around town, you might see a new patio fence going up around, which makes our patio look a little bit more attractive and official.
It's really pretty.
It is really pretty. If you were watching the live stream I did with CH on the Hoppy Hour, I panned over and showed that. Yeah. Anything else maybe going on?
That's up over there, and yeah.
Next week we're going to be live streaming from a different location.
Next week we're going to figure out how to do a big batch live stream with a fun little twist. So stay tuned. That'll be fun.
Definitely.
Matt, you got anything in your world in the I'm about to be a brewery world?
So those of you who don't know about the live stream, I am going to start working with a new brewery here in Spokane Valley.
Not instead of us, just like,
Wait,
for the real brewing-y parts.
I'm going to be making beer.
Yeah.
Other news was Spokane had its first Lilac Beer Festival yesterday.
Yeah. Did you make it down to that?
Yeah.
Nice. How was it?
It was great. I was going to say, people hid from the rain, so I could tell who were really from Spokane and who weren't.
Yeah. That was fun. I only saw pictures. I was at a track meet all yesterday, so.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was lots of good beer and stuff, and I'm excited to see where it goes because I think that they have the opportunity to expand and grow it into a cool way. And obviously, I'm still going to go with you guys to June, the beer fest over in Redmond. So any PayPal money that people want to send our way to help cover costs of stuff.
For every PayPal money, we will throw one beer at you. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. It's a pretty solid deal.
Yeah, you can be running or not.
Yeah, target practice is fun. I think that covers it for
I was gonna
East
say,
Spring News.
There's not a ton of other major beer news in.
Which means let's jump into our beer of the week. Bum bum bum. Beer of the week. Yeah. Talk about English barley wines today. English barley wines are not an easy style to. I mean, they're a simple recipe, but they're not an easy style to make good.
Not at all. And specifically English barley wine on that, because that's the big barley wines. Generally, when you're finding barrel-aged barley wine, stuff like that, that's pretty close to what you're drinking. American barley wine is just not quite as popular and kind of dying off as a style. There's a few still good ones out there, but English, especially because of the barrels, is taking the cake on it.
Yeah, and it's got a lot of dynamic complexity underneath it, depending on if you brew it correctly or not. And if you brew it correctly, I think it takes on that barrel character even more, and it ends up being a pretty shelf-stable beer too. So these are the ones that, like, if you get a proper one, it can be 5, 6, 7 years old and still be getting better, or it could not be. It could, there's some styles that probably will peak out at that 2-3 years, but if they're brewed right and they're boozy enough, they'll get better.
They should. It's an overall impression of malty richness and complex, intense flavors. Chewy and rich body with warming alcohol and pleasant fruity or hoppy interest. When aged, can take on port-like flavors. A wintertime sipper. And I don't agree with the wintertime sipper. It's just a nice sipper anytime.
Yeah, it's a summer sipper. It's just
What?
got down your zippers sipper.
Well, you got to be seasonist like that, BJCP.
That's right. Just sit by a warm fire right next to the hot, smoldering lake. Call it a day.
I definitely drink that in 100-degree weather.
100%. Appearance color may range from rich gold to very dark amber or even dark brown. Often has ruby highlights, which comes from process. Don't get me wrong, it's not a thing. But should not be opaque. This thing has been aged long enough, it should be pretty clear. You
Pretty
should
damn clear.
have all the stuffs settled out. Low to moderate to off-white head. May have low head retention. May be cloudy with chill haze at cooler temperatures. Again, that has to do with aging process, not necessarily how it's made like other beers might. Generally clears to good, brilliant clarity as it warms. The color may appear to have great depth as if viewed through a thick glass lens. High alcohol and viscosity may be visible in legs when the beer is swirled in a glass. So this thing it can be a thick boy, but it doesn't always have to be super thick.
Along with that, even if you're getting that chill haze on it, if you drink it at proper temperatures, you should never be drinking it with chill haze, because the chill haze will disappear when the beer reaches a right cellar temperature to drink. Not a beer you should drink cold. It's a drink you should drink at cellar temperatures for the best experience.
Yeah, 48, 55, anywhere in that range is going to be really, really proper for this. And you want to serve it into a glass that funnels the aromatics too. So as it's warming up, it's just blending the alcohol and all the complexity into the nose of the glass, and then you can really experience it. Aroma on this is very rich and strongly malty, often with a caramel-like aroma in darker versions, or a light toffee character in paler versions. May have moderate to strong fruitiness, often with dark or dried fruit character, particularly in the darker versions. Now, the hop aroma may range from mild to assertive and is typically floral, earthy, or marmalade-like. A lot of times hop aroma should be dissipated by the time you actually get this beer because it's that aged. But if it's there, that's what it's like. Alcohol aromatics may be low to moderate, but are soft and rounded. Kind of disagree with that one a little bit. I think the alcohol can be, it can come across a little bit sharp, a little bit peppery sometimes. It's going to depend on when it is in the aging process. But also when these things get big and boozy, they're going to carry some sherry, some hard alcohol notes. But that doesn't mean unpleasant. That's not fusel alcohols. That's just a nice...
It's
pleasant.
like when you can smell the alcohol in port and you're like, that smells really nice and sweet, and this is going to be delicious liquid chocolate.
Absolutely.
That's how you should be able to smell it in barley wine.
Mm-hmm.
Just there, contributing well in balance without being overpowering, and especially out of balance. If it's out of balance, it's either fermented wrong when you got fusel alcohols, or it just hasn't sat long enough and it hasn't aged long enough.
Yeah, mellowed back into it. The aroma may have rich character, including bready, toasty, toffee, and molasses notes. Aged versions may have a sherry-like quality, possibly vinous, or port-like aromatics, and generally more muted malt aromas. Let's talk about where a lot of those because a lot of darker notes were kind of talked about in this. And I'm personally of the opinion that very little or zero specialty malt should be used in any barley wine at all. So for me, a big English barley wine is just going to start with a nice English base malt. Halcyon works fine. The Chevalier would work good.
That'd work a good one. Anything, honestly, in an English character of a base malt on there will work awesome, but you do need the actual English base malts to get that big, round character from the malt to start out with to further caramelize into something delicious. Along with that, I mean, it's taking Imperial runnings off of it, doing a really big extended boil to get all of those good, dark, figgy date flavors coming out of it. And some of that comes from the aging, but you're getting the Maillard for your color, the Maillard for your richness, and the Maillard for your carameliness coming out of there. That should still pretty much be a single malt. And as far as I understood them, the finest of October ales, which is in the English Barleywine style, for my mind, technically a little bit different because I'm expecting a little bit of that, as the English would put it, stale character, a touch of Brett in my October ale, rather than not having that in the English Barleywine. But as far as I understand, you take your best crops of the season and in October, malt up your single malt and just make the best beer you can to lay down and drink next year.
Yeah, I think we did a while ago. We did a torture testing the Anvil Foundry when the first iteration of that came out, and that was a more Englishy style barley wine. And I think we ended up doing a 4 or 5 hour boil on it. Maybe even had to start with 2 different boils and then get it down to 1 boil. But that's the process. Just a lot of work.
There's a video on that you can go watch.
Yeah. phub.com. Flavor: strong, intense, complex, multi-layered malt flavors malt flavors ranging from bready, toffee, and biscuity in paler versions to deep nut, deep toast, dark caramel, and or molasses in darker versions. Moderate to high malty sweetness on the palate, although the finish may be moderately sweet to moderately dry depending on aging. Some oxidative or venous flavors may be present, and often complex alcohol flavors should be evident. That's what we talk about when we talk about it turning into like sherry, like that sherry-like oxidized alcohol kind of flavor. It's not a bad thing as long as it doesn't turn into like wet cardboard or like something really gross.
Yeah.
And in high alcohol things like this, usually as long as they're long boil time, they really shouldn't turn into something gross.
Maillard is important.
Yeah. Moderate to fairly high fruitiness, often with dark or dried fruit character. Hot bitterness may range from just enough for balance to a firm presence. Balance therefore ranges from malty to somewhat bitter. Paler versions often more bitter, better attenuated, and show more hop character than darker versions. However, all versions are malty in the balance. Low to moderately high hop flavor, often floral, earthy, or marmalade-like English varieties. So what they're talking about with the attenuation and how that can kind of push forward hop character is if the beer in this one, the low end can go down to 1.018 dryness, which is still relatively sweet. But even at 1.018, when you're getting up into a 10-11% beer, that's going to taste a little bit sharper, a little bit brighter, and so hop character that's still left in there can be pushed forward.
Definitely. Alcohol is less viscous than water, so it's not as full or sweet. Well, it's sweeter than water, but that's a different subject.
Sweeter like Sunday morning. That's not the song. That's a different song.
It could be a song.
We can make it into a song.
It could be a song.
All right, someone drop the beat for that, and we'll freestyle it.
Comments. The richest and strongest of modern English ales. The character of these ales can change significantly over time. Both young and old versions should be appreciated for what they are. That's pretty important on that. The malt profile can vary widely. Not all examples will have all possible flavors or aromas. Paler varieties won't have the caramel and richer malt flavors, nor will they typically have the darker dried fruits. Don't expect flavors and aromatics that are impossible from a beer of that color. Yeah, they range a lot, so don't be a D-bag and gatekeep about barley wines just because it's the wrong color, basically, is what that's saying.
Yeah, there's a lot of different brands of barley wine, and they don't be barley wine-acist.
Exactly. And the young and both, the statement about that, the young and old versions should be appreciated for what they are, because they are vastly two different beers. Generally, when you're drinking a young barley wine, be it American or English, it is far more aggressive, far more bitter, far more hoppy in there, not quite as smooth and congruent, and can sometimes almost present as a big IPA even. You're getting the aged versions where the hops have definitely mellowed out of it, and you're getting all the flavors to come back together, and you're getting a much more smooth, congruent beer. It drinks a lot more like a sweet barley wine than you'd expect, and you shouldn't put an aged, sweet, smooth barley wine expectation on a young barley wine. should you drink a young barley wine and be like, yeah, this is nice and big and hoppy and delicious, and it will be much better after a few years.
Yeah. So that young barley wine, I usually say they peak around 2-3 months. Not peak, but that's where they present as a good barley wine. You're still not pumping them out IPA fast, so it's not like a 3 to 5 week turnaround. It's a little bit longer than that, but it still has some of that hop character that was described earlier. And then it's just going to get better with age.
Exactly.
Homebrew for Life, thank you so much for the super chat. Peter's Knoxville Ticket Fund. Let's make it happen, Captain. Also, we missed Jeongyak Hyo earlier. Thank you so much for the super chat. I also feel like he always super chats at the very beginning just to make me say his name wrong.
Probably.
I think that makes the most sense.
Just likes to hear it.
History. You want to do history?
Well, there's a really good comment here. Gary Ballard says, I do 3 beers from one mash: barley wine, bitter, and small beer.
Nice.
And yeah, that's a really nice party guile session there. Very traditional as far as English beers go. As far as I know, though, in England, and there's probably some small breweries, craft breweries, that still do it. But of the bigger guys, the only person who does that now is Fuller's.
Yeah.
They do it for London Pride. They do a multi-guile for that. And that's a pretty... We've done it before. It's a cool way to make beer, and you can get some really cool complexity, especially doing the multi-guile blending back in. That's where we get Imperial from. If you've never really known where Imperial beers come from, it's party guiling. Your first runnings are your Imperial runnings. Make a beer out of it, send it to the Imperial court, and drink it. There you go.
To the if you want to get really, really high alcohol, to get 3 different beers off of it, I feel like you'd have to do a really thick mash and just run off that first part of the thick mash.
Yeah.
And then get like a 14%, and then but like a super thick one.
Yeah.
And then you'd have to get a big run for the medium one and still get a lot of boil time on both of them, and then the light one can just be a regular boil time. That'd be a fun style of. That'd be an interesting like theme for a brewery. Is every single type of beer they do as a multi-guile, and it's always either 2 or 3 beers, so people can kind of see malt profile wise where they're getting the big and the small.
Oh, small beers.
Plus, it saves some time.
Save some time. Save some money.
Yeah.
Definitely be a lot more work intensive, but that could be an interesting thing to do for sure. Long to go with that. Steven Studemeyer, freezing a barley wine, help with the taste profile. Icing a beer. Eisbach is the most traditional one to do that. Help is a very strong word for that. It will make it taste more intense. When you ice a beer, all you're doing is taking out the water. You're freezing water out of it, so you're concentrating all the flavor. And you're concentrating all the flavor. If it's not good flavors, or it happens to be a not good flavor that's just under flavor threshold, you concentrate it, now it goes over flavor threshold, and you just made the beer a lot worse.
Could be fun.
Yeah, could make it a lot better as well. It's a whole style of doing things with beer. There's a whole style of beer around it. So obviously it's not always bad, and you can set it up to be actually very tasty. But just to do it to a random beer, you might send things out of proportion, and that could be in a good way or a bad way. So maybe.
With stouts, I've found that's kind of the one that ends up being a little bit of a risk sometimes, because if it's sweet enough, then it can turn everything into a nice balance and make it a little bit boozier, and the extra booziness kind of like heatens it up, gives you that warming sensation, ends up being a nice stout. We accidentally did that with like iteration number 1 or 2 of Count Chocula, when our thermostat thing on our refrigerator turned it into a freezer. And then on the other hand, if it's not sweet enough, the roast malts on a stout can end up getting extra bitter if you ice it. So that's kind of an example on both sides. Whoa, what's going on in the what's happening here?
We're getting some
people
chats.
I was gonna say, Homebrew for Life has started a donation train for us.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. MC Mike 1, go visit Knoxville. Cheers, appreciate that. Homebrew for Life, your double IPA Quake fail vid was my all-time favorite. I appreciate Homebrew for Life for posting a video where it didn't work out. Not a lot of people have the balls to do that. Or they'll just make up something and be like, yeah, it worked out, guys. So, honesty, that's great.
I was gonna say, and people learn from mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Stefan Studemeyer, for your super chat. But I'm also going to jump back to Jason Granite. He's got a good question about butyric acid. You got butyric acid in his beer, thoroughly washed everything with PBW, hot water, and star sand bath. Should you be concerned about potential reinfection? Normally what produces butyric acid can be killed really easy, and a lot of the time it's literally just lab bacteria. A lot of the time lactobacillus in the presence of oxygen. Sometimes that creates an acetone flavor, a printerine flavor, but it can also create barf. If it's the wrong kind of lab in there and it's not at the right temperature, most lactose love to ferment above 90 to 100 degrees. If you drop them down too low, they produce barf. The good thing about that is they're super easy to kill. And if you put hops in there, you'll most likely kill it. There's a couple of other bacteria that create butyric acid that are a little bit harder to kill. Most of them die in the presence of at least about 14 IBU. And I think heat's above about 120. Most thermal death is about 115, 116 for labs, lactic acid bacterias.
Butyric producers are very weak, and so it's not as big of a deal. Tim, take off your shirt. I'm guessing he's talking to a Tim that's like next to him. It's probably like the Tim that he's hanging out.
Probably. That he has voice to text on.
Peter, what's up with your Hinge handle? What's Hinge? Is that like a dating app or something like that?
Maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It is.
Yeah.
It's broken. I don't know. Ask my wife.
All right. History. Strong ales of various formulations have long been brewed in England and were known by several names. I actually really love names for English strong ales sometimes, like Skull Splitter and stuff like that. It's super fun. Modern day Barleywine traces back to Bass No. 1, which was first called a Barleywine in 1872. Barleywines were darker beers until Tennant, now Whitbread, first produced Gold Label, a golden-colored barley wine in 1951, usually the strongest ale offered by a brewery, and in recent years, many commercial examples are now vintage dated and offered as a limited release winter seasonal specialty. The original barley wine style that inspired derivative variations in Belgium, the United States, and elsewhere in the world. That was, your big beer, and a lot of time, like we talked about in the Party Guile, English pub beers, well, not pub beers, I shouldn't say that, but English beers were always denoted into the big old beer, the Imperial beer, or sometimes even referred to as the stale beer because of Brettanomyces. You had your mid-strength beers, and then you had your milds, and they were sent out to different places and drank at different times. So
old ales are probably some of my favorite styles, and let's see, J.W. Lee's Harvest. That's an old ale, right?
Harvest ale. That's an October ale. That's an old ale and October ale for me is a little bit different. They're the same damn thing, but they're a little bit different to me. And J.W. Lee's, in my opinion, is one of the most amazing October ales that you can consistently get. Obviously, there's going to be better ones from other people that aren't widely available, but J.W. Lee's, anytime I see it, I'm going to drink one.
It's amazing. I discovered that one when we had the old bottle shop, and that was I had no idea what to expect. I just saw it there. I was like, that looks interesting. I never ordered that before, and just randomly ordered a case because it was more expensive than other stuff, but not outlandishly expensive. That was, you can any time of the day, anytime, whatever. JW Lee's, I'll drink one. It's going to taste amazing. It's
going to taste amazing, and that is a beer that's a perfect example of aging perfectly through the ages. Even when JW gets a little bit too old, it still doesn't go into into cardboard or anything like that. It loses some of its flavor. You're like, man, I should have drank this a couple of years ago, but
it's still just pleasant and subtly fruity in all the right ways, all the good ways.
And it's a great beer to do vintage tastings of. It's fairly consistent through its brewing. It's fairly cheap to get a hold of comparatively, and you can get a hold of it everywhere. So you can just buy a butt ton of it, buy a case, and then only drink one a year, and then just keep buying new cases. And by the time you get 12 years into it, you'll have 12-year vintage on it, you know.
Yeah. 10 points
Something
to anybody
like
who
that.
finds 2 vintages of JW Lees and sends it to us.
2 vintage, let's go. All right, 10 points for 2 vintages.
Right.
15 points for 4 vintages, but you get 50 points for 6 vintages.
Yeah, that's an increase. There's some motivation right there, guys.
Yeah.
James Crabtree, thanks so much for the super chat. Also, Just Brewing in the house. What's up, Just Brewing? And Chris Vodka. I only know him from the H4L, watching H4L.
H4L. Style kit. Well, before we get into that, what are we drinking?
This is Tanner Cole's Mexican lager that I picked up a couple weeks ago.
Tanner, oh yeah, and Tanner was on last week's live stream too. You met him at the Brewfest, right? Yeah.
Yep.
Tanner, if you're watching,
We're drinking your beer.
and this is the more La Dos Equis Amber style, right?
Yes.
Or the Vienna.
Yeah.
And I saw him at the start of the live stream.
Nice. Well, if you're
Yeah.
still there, thanks for the beer.
And he just gave us a woo.
Oop, nope, there he is. What up?
Boop. Style, no. Characteristic ingredients, high quality, well modified, pale malt should be the backbone of the grist. You need a good malt backbone for this.
Yeah,
and
every time
everybody
you say
talk.
backbone.
You need malt backbone on a lot of beers that you drink. You need to describe it as that, and then you take. What is the new one?
Where does Cameron work?
Beverly's.
What?
Where does Cameron work now?
Yeah.
Oh, Cameron is starting a new brewery in Vancouver called Vice.
Vice.
Vice?
Yeah.
Vice.
Well,
Okay.
if you find Cameron Johnson's brewery, Vice, just comment malt backbone on
all of
his
his
beers.
every single one of his beers, and then tag him, Cameron Johnson, hashtag malt backbone in any related brewing and or rowing
Yeah.
video.
Looking
If
it
it's
up,
got a
I'm
great
looking up
like
Instagram.
stroke on the row, malt backbone.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's just how you live your life.
All right, Cameron is a really nice guy. We enjoy him. We enjoy his beers, but he had a fun rant about not calling beers or not saying the beers have a big malt backbone because that's just a key word, and all beers have to have a malt backbone to stand up because it's malt.
Yeah.
And he's not necessarily wrong, but it's still funny.
Yeah, it is a very universal thing to say about beer.
I
so.
want a citrusy IPA that's really hoppy. Awesome, dude. You just described pretty much every single IPA out there.
Yeah.
So, I don't like beers because of the hops in them. Do you have anything like a pale ale? That's not hoppy. You're almost kind of right.
Yeah, it's one of those things we get a lot as people who both brew and serve beer, and
You know, it's hey, if you got to sell beer, you got to sell beer. There's a lot of keywords that happens in all the alcohol industries. I mean, there's good
it's
barrel
nitpicky.
notes in a whiskey. Well, no shit. That's the whole point of a whiskey is to taste barrel. Yeah, there's good barrel notes, and there's your soapbox for the day. Check them off on the bingo.
Yeah, and we're actually going to have in 2 weeks, one former sales rep and one current sales rep to come talk about how to sell beer.
nice.
Yeah,
I'm good at selling beer too.
it happens. It
But
happens.
that's just because I
and,
get because I
you
strip
know.
because I'm lap dances.
you know, boobies sell beer. Anyway. Well modified malt should form the backbone of the grist with a judicious amounts of should form the backbones of the grist. Dark malt should be used with great restraint, and if at all, as most of the color arises from a lengthy boil, and I like that, should be used with great restraint. There's sometimes that you can use some of the roasted malts to get a little bit of roast character into your beer. I don't necessarily mind that in English barley wine. I just don't think that the color should come from malts at all. The dark malts, you should get that color from the boil. English hops such as Northdown, Target, East Kent Goldings, Fugels are typical. Characterful British yeast. Our preferred yeast is the London strain. It comes from actually Fuller's. I think it's the one they use for London Pride. It's the ESB strain, pub strain, and Imperial. It's absolutely fantastic, but it will fall asleep before it's done fermenting, so you got to finish it out with something else. And in all honesty,
Sleepy Beaver.
yeah. if you get down to the end, finishing it out with any other type of yeast, even something like a high gravity Belgian yeast, you're not really going to taste the phenolics that come off of that or the extra flavors. So just get a nice high grav aggressive yeast to finish it out, and you should be good. Let the nice soft English yeast go in there and prep it all up for you. Then you come in the end with a nice, speedy, aggressive high grav and finisher all the way out.
Should we talk about this beer real quick?
Yeah, I did skip. I will say I did skip a part of characteristic ingredients in there that I don't agree with at all. In BJCP, you're ruining beers by putting that part in there, and you know who you are.
Yeah, and if you're reading the guidelines along with us, you know what that part is, and just be a better brewer.
It's so dumb. I'm just going to say that. It is so dumb to include into a style like this, because all of that flavor should be coming from your boil, as is traditional, because, you know, they had just one type. And it literally says right up there a little bit further that you're just using the best, well-modified pale malt from the season.
Yeah.
And then you go and say stupid things. Just boo. Boo on you.
I will add that ingredient historically was in this style of beer, but it wasn't the same ingredient as it is today. It's what they call the completely different that ingredient than today's. Anyways,
it's not malted in the same, and the only thing that's similar is they share the same name. You know, it's literally like having a Sierra Nevada Pale Ale sitting it next to a Wookiee Jack, because it has Pale Ale in the name, even though it's a black IPA. It has Pale Ale in the name. Both of them have Pale Ale in it, so obviously they're the same thing, right? Right, BJCP?
We digress.
Two
But also-
soapboxes.
But also do better. If you can
Also
figure
do
out
that.
what we just said from the podcast when you can't even see us, I'm double points to you.
Double points, and also, if you can figure out what that is, mark it off on bingo,
Yeah.
because it's definitely a bingo square. All right, let's talk about this beer a little bit.
So 40% pills, 40% red X, 20% flaked corn. I will right off the bat throw out that I admire the 40% red X for that amber hue, for that Vienna style coloration.
What'd you ferment this with?
I get a little sulfuriness. Is that what you're going with?
Not quite. There's a high production yeast note in there
Like breadiness?
that I get from a specific yeast that I'd like to know if it's this yeast. I don't think so if you made a proper cerveza, but Omega Mexican Lager 1. Yeah, it's what I'm getting off of it is a little bit of the 05 fermented to warm. Tastes like warm Bud Light.
To me, that almost comes across peppery, like jalapeno peppery.
I'm not getting the jalapeno pepper, but
That's how it comes on my tongue. Overall, I think the malt profile is good. I think it's a combination. So what I think that is a combination of sulfurs from the yeast and hops. I think the hops might have been slightly, I don't know what hops you use, but it might have been slightly cheesy, or maybe they're just a really peppery hop. And then they came across with the sulfur that are kind of combining to make that note.
it might be. I don't know. I would have to use more of the Omega Mexican Lager to see if it's something that sticks through, if it's for fermentation stuff. It's not there in the flavor like I get in 05. I hate Chico strain specifically for that one warm Bud Light flavor you get when you ferment it over 65. It's not as universal as people think it is. You need better temp control to really get a super clean beer off of it. And in fact, I've seen a lot of people describe, a lot of yeast companies starting to describe 05 as actually having yeast-derived flavors at 68 or higher, which is nice because it does. That flavor is not sticking through. It is a little bit on the nose, and I just don't.
Ability hops. Ooh.
I don't know exactly what that is. I don't know. I mean, you just nobility. It could just be the high proportion of corn in there that I'm getting off of that. Really nice and pleasant. I mean,
Overall, I think it's super
this
pleasant.
is a Mexican lager. Definitely.
Nobility hops. I'm unfamiliar with nobility hops, by the way. I think they're definitely new to me. Flavor profile: citrus, herbal, green tea. Yeah, I'm thinking that flavor I'm getting is a combination of some sulfurs with the some of the herbal notes from the nobility hops.
Nobility hops.
But
I know the smell
It's
I'm
also-
getting
there's
is
a little
definitely
banana, too.
yeast derived.
Has
That's might be what I'm getting. So it was a little bit of that hot fermented Chico, but getting into the banana
as it warms
note,
up, the banana starts to come out, and it's like
that's almost the breadiness of
Yeah.
04 that you get when it's hot fermented, that
Yeah.
banana bread.
yeah, exactly, just a little bit. I was almost gonna say almost German, but it's just it's not like it's not full like German. It still tastes crisp and clean, so
Yeah,
it's interesting.
that is very
It's a
interesting.
good beer. I don't think it quite hit the Mexican lager mark, but it's a good beer.
It's a really good,
If you-
honestly, I would
If
say.
you blindfolded me and told me this was a, amber lager, just and that's all you said, I'd probably be like, oh,
Yeah,
it's really good.
Exactly. It's just for Mexican. I think you're right. It needs to be a touch more crispy.
Yeah,
A touch more crispy. What'd you ferment it at?
that's a good question. Fermentation schedule.
Yeah.
What else we got with a style comparison?
We were on style comparison, and I mean, it's kind of a good style comparison, but it basically just says English barley wines are bigger and maltier than American barley wines, which tend to be hoppier on it.
Yeah.
And there is some nice distinction that it has some overlap with British Old Ale on the lower end. Old Ales, by BJCP standards, are actually less alcoholic than barley wines. I don't know. I mean, historically, yeah. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, because the character, especially the stale or Brett character of Old Ale, I think can carry into the higher alcohols as well and be distinctly different from the barley wine. But BJCP.
Yep.
But on saying that, the English barley wine generally does not have the vinous qualities of age or the stale Brett character, but rather tends a mature, elegant signs of age, which I think they're just trying to say ages without Brett. You don't get the funk, you don't get the super dry coming out of it. And Brett in Old Ale should be very, very restricted, and just a touch of funk. And we found it, actually, if you want to mimic that in an Old Ale or a barley wine, just a scotch of buckwheat honey will achieve that flavor beautifully.
And give you a little extra free alkies.
Whoa! But yeah, so there we go. That's nice. There we are.
Just in general, this thing can go 8 to 12%. Final gravity can be as thick as 1018 to 1030, so 1030 is pretty thick. But if you got the alkies to back it up, and if you load the hops up enough, then 30% can just taste like a really full, thick, rich, boozy something. So, Stephen Stoudemire, Knoxville, do it. Also, Freestyle Old Ale Recipe. That's going to be super simple. Old Ale Recipe is for a 5-gallon batch, like let's call it 18 pounds of halcyon, 20 pounds of halcyon.
I mean, I get, if you want to go classic and easier to get, Maris Otter.
Yeah, Maris Otter.
And that's probably a little bit traditional. Halcyon, Maris Otter, Pearl, Golden Promise, or Chevalier.
Yeah, any of those high flavor, medium protein base malts that just they come packed with a flavor, and they're not going to be grainy like a Pilsen malt. They're not going to be super neutral like just a basic 2-row or pale. They've got a little bit of character to them. Then you can do a ramp mash. You can also do a decoction if you want to, but the easiest thing to do is just do a party guile, or just plan on doing a really long boil. So if you're doing a 5-gallon batch, plan on running off 10, 11 gallons. If you're doing that much, then grain, then it shouldn't be that hard to run off that without getting into overly sparging or making anything astringent come off, which is totally fine, because even if you did, it would probably break out in the boil. Not a big deal. And then just boil it for 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours, get it down to the volume that you want. Make sure you got plenty of Maillard reaction, plenty of natural caramelization. Throw it in a fermenter with Fuller's would probably be my favorite. And then for me, the easiest is finish it off with Irish Ale and a little bit of Brett, and let it age for a year.
On that, the hops, just do something traditionally English on it, or something indistinct. Magnum could work extremely well here if you don't really want to worry about the hops. But any of the other ones that we said on this list, the Northdown, Fugels, EKGs, Target, Bramling Cross in there. I would keep it English because the massive amounts of hops that you're going to put in there, and you should put a fair amount of them in there. Most of them being bittering because you really need to balance out the sweetness of these beers. If you aren't going to put Brett in it, especially if you're not going to go for the more dry old ale side, you really need to balance out the beer with a good amount of hops. Just make sure they're English or maybe something noble on that. French, German might be getting a little bit low and a little out of character. And then, yeah, boil the shit out of it. Get tons and tons of Maillard. Even if you're party guiling, multi-guiling onto it, still boil the shit out of those and get some great Maillard coming from them before you blend it back together to either ferment or post-ferment for beer. So, they're super easy. Get yourself an English malt, boil the shit out of it. Get yourself some English hops, balance out all that sweetness. Get yourself a great English yeast on that. An 04, I think, is not the best one for this. Straight British ale. I get a little bit more fruity strain of an English strain. Ferment it out until you can get it down as far as you can go, and there you go, man. It's that easy. They're very simple beers to make. Hard to do because of process, but very simple.
Yeah, and just you got to be patient too. IBUs, you're probably pushing an old ale to about 80 IBUs estimated. I would just do that with Magnum. Usually, you can probably go as low as like 60 IBUs if you're using like Fuggles or a lower alpha hop because you don't want too much hop matter in there. Mm-hmm. But the idea is that you're aging these out for a year, and so if they're going into the fermenter at 80, they're going to be drank at 20, 30 IBUs, something like that. Jimmy J says his plan is Maris Otter, Cara Rye, and maybe some DRC. Buckwheat Honey. I like the Buckwheat Honey. DRC, I don't hate because at least it's crystal with a little bit of roast quality because that's some extra character. Mm-hmm. Cara Rye, it's interesting. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, process is going to make way more of a difference than recipe on these kind of beers anyway.
Yeah.
So you'll just end up with a darker, naturally sweeter version of the same thing once it's aged out. Fresh, I guarantee you that it won't taste to my taste buds.
Cara Rye is very aggressive. Especially on the rye part, you get less sweetness than you would out of other cara malts, less than you would expect associating it with other cara malts, and it very intensifies the spiciness of the rye.
Yeah, but I mean that said, if Jimmy, I know you make good beer, so I'm sure if it's tasting good to you, I trust it.
The DRC double roasted crystal is nicer, and what we were talking about crystals being different now than they were before. Double roasted crystal is closer approximation to older crystals in the way that they were making them before our modern malting processes. So I don't actually mind that. That's going to have some really interesting roasty notes to it. That's really going to boost up your figgy fruity flavors. So that'll be interesting. The Buckwheat Honey, do be very careful with Buckwheat Honey. You can go overboard extremely fast with that. It is potent. I think we used half a pound in a 1 barrel batch that ended up being, I think it was 1.1. I think it was about 1.120 or to 1.130, somewhere right about in there. So an overall weight percentage of malt bill sugar fermentable is very small. Keep it small. Buckwheat is aggressive.
Yeah.
I like that though. It's a decent plan for it. It'll probably make a pretty darn good barley wine that you should share with us.
Tanner Cole says his fermentation schedule on this guy was 3 weeks at 51, raised to 70 for 2 days, and then drop back down into keg for it's approximately 7 weeks old. Probably needs some more time. I think on a side note, played with ultra firm on this. Okay. 51 degrees for 3 weeks. Personally speaking, I probably would have waited until probably only would have gone 10 days, something like that. Once I got the final gravity within a handful of points, 4 or 5 points of final, that's when I would have just gone ahead and ramped it up to that 70. Get an actual finishing activity there while the yeast is still kind of doing its thing, and then it would have dropped it down back into a conditioning phase at 52-ish, then down to a lagering phase below 50, and then in kegs.
The VDK rest helps. It's not. It helps more when you still have yeast up and actively fermenting. That way, the yeast can actively start absorbing some of the bad stuff, as well as off-gassing some sulfurs and things like that.
Yeah, it does more than just get rid of diacetyl and stuff like that. It's it helps uptake some of the bad processes. Not bad process, but some of the if your yeast has a little stress fermenting, it's going to always produce something that tastes a little off. And so getting an active VDK rest can also help absorb some of those. And then conditioning time is going to help too. And then obviously lagering time, as you said. Giving it a little age will bring out a lot of that.
Honestly, I think a little bit more age on this probably would have dropped some of that yeast character that I'm getting out of it a little bit more. Would have definitely helped it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, overall, pretty decent beer.
I drank it.
Yeah.
I would drink some more of it.
Yeah. Gary
Alliance of Calgon says, gentlemen, favorite beer live stream.
Yay.
Thank you. We appreciate that.
He also says Fuggles, not Fugles.
Yeah.
I'm gonna, you know.
Because we've got Fugel. We've got some fucking love.
Fugs. Fugs are delicious. The Golding Fuggle mix, Gary Ballard for in English Old Ale. Yeah, that sounds delicious. Just keep in mind when you're using low alpha acid hops on something that you have to get high. And we have another question down here, Stefan Studemeyer. He asked us for a quick recipe, IBU on that. We like to track actual perceived bitterness and hoppiness rather than IBU. But if you're going for a number, the statistics on it are actually 35 to 70. It's very deceptive. 35 seems low, but that's when you're chucking it all in late and you still have the giant hoppiness to counteract the bitterness in there. You just need to balance out your beer. But the Fuggle, again, talking about that, the Golding Fuggles mix, when you get down into low alpha acids, because you have to add so much hops to it to balance out all the sweetness in these beers, do be careful that you're not loading it down with plant matter and or extracting green chlorophyll flavors rather than your good, hoppy, delicious flavors. But yeah, the IBUs, they vary pretty widely on that. And again, that's going to be one of those things that if you can impart a lot of perceived bitterness or a lot of perceived hoppiness that's going to stay, has a good staying power through it, something like Warrior, which I don't think would be traditional in this, and I don't think you should use Warrior. I mean, you could. That'd be all right. But if it has a lot of staying power, you could hit lower IBUs. That way, as it's aging out, it comes into balance a little bit better. But you're looking for balance more than a number. Which is what you should be doing anyway with hops. Balance your beer. Numbers are deceptive.
Yeah. Unless it's like a hazy IPA, and then you're just like going for flavies.
And then, well...
different kind of balance, but...
Yeah, different. I mean, it's a super big hoppy balance. Some would argue that those are extremely hoppy beers, just with no bitterness or IBUs. Yeah. Kind of how IBU is a myth.
It's real. I mean, it's not real. That one.
It's real. I mean, it is real. It's the International Bittering Unit of alpha acids converted into iso-alpha acids in pure water. Like, I don't know if you guys know that, but when they did these, they did it in water, not beer. So you're getting a number for water.
It's it's good for calculating your blonde ale to just get not too bitter, I guess.
A guideline.
Let's talk about topic number one. Topic number one. That's the only topic we're going to get to today. But it's kind of a fun topic to talk about, and it's why pro brewers, especially pro brewers that are confident in what they do, what gives them the confidence to try new styles. Like, how can we? A lot of people ask us, how can we be on a 10 barrel system or something like that and try something that we have never made before? So let's go and break down a little bit of what goes into us knowing that we're going to make a good beer, kind of no matter what we're trying. And then I think that goes with the Barleywine pretty well, because barley wines are kind of a risky style. You're risking a year of your tank space and a really long day of your life, because they are very time consuming to make correctly into putting into these beers. But I don't think we've never failed on a barley wine. They've all turned out great.
Mm-hmm. It's cushier doing a barley wine. There's more things to hide behind. But at the same time, if you don't make a great barley wine, you're not going to sell it in a professional setting.
Yeah.
It's a beer style that is very, very susceptible to craft beer nerds, aficionados, and people are very discerning about good beer on that. Barleywine, it's not something like IPA where everybody has an opinion on IPA and they all love them and they half the time are drinking oxidized things that they shouldn't be drinking. Most people who love barley wines and they love good barley wines and won't settle for a bad barley wine.
Yeah, if someone's coming in because you posted, hey, barley wine, you know that's going on Untapped in like 4.5 seconds.
Yes. And if you haven't put it there, they will put it there.
Yeah.
Along with that, most of these people are going to buy cans and or bottles and things like that and age them out for years to come. That's another hard thing for a brewer is we have to expect these people to not drink our beer fresh. They're going to drink one fresh, and we need them to enjoy it fresh, and we need most people to enjoy it fresh. But the target audience we're really going for are not drinking it fresh. They're drinking it years down the road, and we still have to be able to please them years later, kind of like being married. You know, and it's all in the tongue work.
Yeah.
You start doing the ABCs, and when she grabs your hair, you stop on that letter. But anyway.
But, you know, at some point you're not drinking it fresh, and so...
Yeah, they build it up, and those are beers that become whales. People trade them across state lines and stuff like that. That's a hard market.
Are we still talking about being married? This got into a traffic news joke? I don't know.
But anyway, it's a hard style rather than like, oh yeah, I put citrus and mosaic into my hazy IPA, and then it sells immediately because you said the key words: hazy, citra, and mosaic. You throw Galaxy on there, and it's already sold. I mean, you can't keep it on the shelves, even if it's good or not.
You throw HBC 472 on there, and people are like, huh?
You're like, what is that?
Who is
your favorite hop you never knew you needed to brew with.
Yeah, here you go.
But yeah, so that being said, like Peter was talking about, there's a lot of breweries, Icicle Brewing up in Leavenworth. Their pilot system is 5 barrels. They make 150 gallons at least as their experimental batches. You know, how do they do that? Like, the confidence to be able to do that, to not just be like, oh yeah, I made a 1 barrel batch and people absolutely loved it, so let's jump it up. Like, no, bro, these guys do their test batches bigger than most people's breweries. What gives them the confidence to do that besides just sheer audacity of being a brewer?
I mean, and part of that stuff that we've talked about before, I think that the number one thing that lets us try, especially new styles that are somewhat familiar to us, is just, you know, we have a locked-in set of techniques that we're going to use on every single batch of beer that we know is going to kind of guarantee the beer is made good. Part of that comes with equipment that's specialized to us making good beer. But a lot of this is stuff that is very, very easily translatable to even the homebrew scale, 5, 10, 15 gallons. And these go into just things that we talk about that make it so that there are fewer things that can go wrong. Yeast health, obviously being the most important thing, is a big one. And so when we're doing that, we talk about always doing a starter. We will never, ever not recommend a starter. Even if you're like, can I double pitch and the beer is only 1030 and it's a 2.5 gallon batch, like, yeah, you're probably fine without doing one, but we'll never tell you not to do a starter, just because that starter is going to make your yeast active by the time it goes into your beer, and it's going to eliminate a period of time that is a risk factor. So the faster your yeast acts on your beer, the faster they're competitive, the faster they get rid of any potential for bacteria, the faster they push out oxygen, and the more consistent you're going to be making clean commercial beers. And so a big pitch with a starter and oxygenating your beer, not aerating, oxygenating your beer, are kind of the 3 easiest things for home brewers to be able to do, that commercial brewers kind of just have down pat. We understand that we need to do this every single time, that make good pitches.
And we kind of have to do it to make beer on this scale. It's something that when you get a pro pitch from Imperial, you pretty much get exactly that fresh off the tank from them in a giant container that we can just dump in. It's like, I'm going to make a really good analogy here because it should be relevant to some people. It's like, say you're out, high schooler, you're on the track team, you got to meet today, and you didn't get good, you got your sleep last night, but you get there, you're throwing discus, and your event isn't till 3 o'clock in the afternoon, even though you as a team player had to get there at, say, 11. Now, you take a nice nap on the sidelines, and then immediately wake up, walk to the center, grab your disc, and chuck it. You're not going to be very aware, as if, say, you were prepared the whole time, taking a few warm-up throws on the side, definitely pegging the annoying kid in the stands, and then walk up and actually throw your disc out there where you're nice, warm, loose, relaxed, and ready. That's what you're doing to your yeast. You're just straight waking it up and saying, here,
get in the game.
And it's like, oh, shit, okay. Instead of being like, all right, coach, put me in. Put me in, coach. Also, I want to take a side of, because I just song Michael Groom's Hey from the ABQ. I'm assuming ABQ is Albuquerque, and don't correct me if I'm wrong, because Albuquerque just has the actual, like, best city song ever. The song about the city. It's from Weird Al Yankovic, and if you've never heard Albuquerque, you should do yourself a favor and listen to that song.
I was going to say, that's where I was born.
It's well, hey, yeah, Albuquerque has the best theme song ever. Albuquerque. Anyway.
Is there a fence bowing on that top thing?
It's coming in, but that's actually throughout a lot of them because of tension, maybe swelling and stuff like that.
Yeah, they locked it in and didn't think about that. Oh, well.
Well, that and wood naturally swells in wet environments.
Yeah. We'll see what happens.
Like our rainstorms.
So, in addition to good yeast, part of the locked-in set of tools we have in our tool belt as brewers, as good processes to make sure that we know no matter what beer we're making, it's going to taste good, are things like low-dough or pressure transfer. And so having a sealed system where we know we can get our beer into our next package without picking up oxygen and being completely sealed, so no risk of bacteria. That's another tool in our tool belt. And then heat sanitation. That is specific to pro brewers or people who want to spend a lot of money on the home scale. That one, if you're using stainless, you can put boiling water in it, and you can kind of guarantee everything's going to get killed, which you can't always do in plastic, and definitely not glass, because glass is going to crack.
Unless you spend far too much money on thermal shock proof glass like Pyrex, and I mean, congratulations, and that is amazing if you do it, but that's expensive.
Yeah.
And that's fire kills everything. There's nothing that ruins beer that survives through heat sanitation if you do it properly.
I guess barrels, like old school barrels, could technically be fit in that same category.
You can heat sanitize a barrel.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of reasons why old styles of beer using equipment that you wouldn't think should be able to make good beer made good beer, and still does.
And it still does. It would. There is an actual reason why all beers were not infected with Brett even in the olden days, even though everything was pretty much done in wood, is through practices like this, like heat sanitation. You pour boiling water into your wood and you get the outside of that up to at least 150 degrees. Ain't nothing going to survive in it. That's going to be dead. And then you can create clean beers in wood with no problems.
If you put your wood into boiling water, then more.
It swells up.
Yeah. I was going to say it kills the clap.
Well, yeah, I mean, it does.
Life hacks.
Yeah. So basically, coming back to topic one, it sounds like you're talking about good yeast process.
Good yeast process is the biggest. Yeast Health is the number one.
And process in there. If you can perfect your process, you can almost always move that process to any other system and be successful.
Yeah.
If you're keeping those same process points in there. It may look different on different systems, But as long as you have that same process point in there, for example, the low-dough transfer, pressure transfer, on our 7-barrel system downtown, a lot of the time I'm using CO2, purging out lines with T's connected together, going on to collab on Natural 20's new system with Mike Tatar, and he uses perchloric acid to do it. He'll clean out a tank with perchloric acid to get it nice and sanitized before using it. CO2 pressure out down the line, but leave the liquid in the line for that, and then you push beer back through that line until you push all of the acid out, and then start transferring it into your tank. So there's no gas in there at all. And that's a process he developed at several other big breweries. And that's something that, as a home brewer, that's really hard to watch your beer go down the drain. You don't have a lot of it. As a professional brewer, we lose a couple of gallons, and that's literally the drops you lost on your floor to us.
Yeah.
But it protects your beer so much. How much are you willing to sacrifice to protect your beer?
Yeah,
There we
firstborn
go.
child.
Hey, you know, it never complains when I make it pregnant.
Um,
Although my wife had a right to complain when she was pregnant because that looked miserable.
yeah.
It did. It did. I don't want to do that. Definitely no Mr. Moms here.
Yeah, we can work on it. Come on, Arnold. Post-brew techniques for correction. So there's also, if you, let's say you don't have perfect technique, or you do have perfect technique, but something else still doesn't seem quite right during the brew day because it's an experimental batch. You're trying something you haven't tried before. New malts, new mashing technique, new hopping style during the whatever. You're doing a side boil, you're doing a decoction, whatever you're trying. You get something new into the fermenter. Everything else is good, like you know it should be. But for whatever reason during fermentation, it's just not going right. Let's say it's a high alcohol batch and your yeast is getting sluggish or stalling or something like that. There's still some techniques for coaxing your beer into being a good beer during fermentation after you've actually brewed the beer. And this is something that we know and utilize on the commercial scale as a just in case. It also gives us the confidence to know, hey, we can try something, and if it doesn't work, we have methods for pushing it to still be a good servable beer.
And this should be in number one, but also in number two, in post-brew and pre-brew techniques, is proper nutrients. We have one in the front, we'll get into that, and I think before that, trying that is proper nutrients and proper set of nutrients. Using something like a Go Firm in your... excuse me, I was almost going to sneeze there. Using something like Go Firm in your yeast starter, which is a very specific yeast nutrient or something like that, that helps get your yeast rehydrated up and healthy and fermenting before you pitch it in. Using a yeast energizer when you know it's going to be a big unstable batch, using the right nutrients, the right type of nutrients, and the right type of beer. If you know, hey, this is going to be a quake and it needs a lot of extra oxygen, it needs a lot of extra nutrients in there, or man, this is USO5 Chico and a 1045 OG blonde ale. We don't need extra nutrients in this guy. In the pre, that's something good to know. How is your yeast going to perform? How you can give it the proper food, minerals, and nutrients to get it to perform in the best way. And then in post-brew, knowing when to throw it, some of those things in, like an energizer, or waiting for a third sugar depletion before throwing in your yeast nutrients on barley wines, things like that. Nutrients are extremely important for yeast health on the front end and reviving yeast for slow stuck fermentations on the back end.
And especially important if you have a low nutrient dense growth medium. So that'd be if you're ever doing seltzers, if you're doing a graph, if you're doing a sizer, something like that. Anything that reduces the nutrients, you have even less, and so it's even more important. There's some natural nutrients in beer, but still there's going to be stresses on living in alcohol. It's your own waste product. So having the right nutrients, even on any beer, is going to be helpful, but especially important in low nutrient dense growth media or high alcohol beers.
or sluggish Belle Saison, Belgian Saison.
Certain yeasts.
Throwing in an energizer will be super helpful to you. It'll help the yeast not go into the sluggish phase that it normally does. And, you know, some things like that. So
Any coup de breaks?
Yeah. There's a couple good ones in there. We'll get that into a minute. Post-brew techniques for correction. The first one on there, repitching yeast and not being afraid to repitch yeast on there. I know so many home brewers that want to go through 20 different things before they just repitch a $5 packet of yeast. And that just seems so silly. Yeah. Sometimes. I mean, sometimes you're like, okay, man, you've been working on this for a minute. Opening that up might be a little dangerous. But most of the time, the best thing you can do is just chuck more yeast on top of that.
Yeah, you're making sure you have it in a big enough pitch, especially if you started that second yeast. It's going to get active right away. You might be just getting through the lag phase of your first yeast, but either way, it's going to end up either helping ferment or being more nutrients, worst case scenario, for the yeast that you already have going in there. And there's also times where you might just have sluggish yeast in the first place. And so there are times, like, for example, if you're doing a barley wine with a yeast that you know is going to fall asleep, or if you're using Belle Saison, which you know might fall asleep, where you're just ready to pitch a hot and heavy yeast right afterwards, it's going to be a strong fermenter and guarantee that the entire ferment gets done before there's a long wait time of no activity, which is going to risk bacteria, which is going to risk oxidation, things like that.
And going into that, to achieve some other characteristics out of your beer as well, additional pitches of yeast to take care of our brews. If that's the thing with the barley wine. We're throwing it in the pub, the ESB yeast, to get that super good English fruit characteristic that yeast produces, knowing that it's going to fall asleep. And then on the back end, throwing in something like Irish ale that's going to go really dry and provide you just a touch of that funk in there. I like the Trappist High Grav triple double from Imperial. You're not going to get very much phenolics out of it. You're not going to get very much esters coming out of something that doesn't, because it doesn't have very much sugars left over. But it's going to super attenuate that down and give you just a little bit of touch of like Belgian fruitiness in there. And on the bottom of an English barley wine, that's awesome. It kind of gives you that little bit of extra age characteristic right out the front. If you know Belle Saison is going to go into a lag phase, you know that happens every single time. It ferments most of the way out, hits its lag phase, hit it with a French Saison, or even maybe a wit yeast or a Trappist yeast, something like that. Finish it all the way out. Getting some extra character and depth to your beer is something awesome that you should consider doing.
Another way to kind of coax fermentation along, if you know you have a low attenuating yeasts, you can also use this to do clarification, to avoid diacetyl. There are enzymes for pretty much any scenario, and enzymes are a good tool to have during fermentation just to make sure that nothing goes wrong. These include enzymes that do reduce the production of diacetyl. These include enzymes that are going to continuously break down long chain starches to make sure that your beer or whatever yeast you're using initially doesn't run into a wall. It always has simple sugars to eat, and then it also includes enzymes that'll break down proteins during fermentation that will make it so that your beer clarifies, because sometimes a little bit of extra yeastiness, a little extra proteins can make your beer taste bleh, and it's not something you want. So enzymes are the second post-brew technique.
Yeah, enzymes are in there. Tom Stills will answer your question along with this, because this is also Tom Stills got a bingo apparently.
Oh, nice.
Nice. Bingo!
Woot.
Boop, 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 bingo!
Actually remember to share it.
Bingo!
Matt's going to send you a brand new car.
Yeah. His car in particular,
Yeah.
with him in it, so he can pick up all the beer you want to give him, and then he's going to try. You don't get to keep the car. You maybe can keep the mat, but you don't get to keep the car or the beer. That's coming back
as
to
long
us.
as you feed me and give me beer, I'm good.
Me happy.
Yeah. So Tom Stills was asking, how do I counter low efficiency when using a Brewzilla? Brewzilla.
Brazilian wax.
I mean, hey. Any of the all-in-one systems I'll include into this: Brewzilla, Digiboil, Mash and Boil, the Anvil systems, Grainfather. I don't know. There's a couple more out there. They're going to be less efficient because they have a very tight, narrow, and tall grain bed, which compacts it more and doesn't allow as much enzyme activity over the grains, as well as the basket in there means that there's water on the outside of the grains and not touching the grains, so that doesn't quite get as much enzymatic activity. Enzymatic activity goes great with enzymes, what we're talking about. So some ways to combat that: a little bit more liquid to your grist ratio. We like to use 1.25 quarts per pound of grain. In a tall vertical system, most of the time we're using 1.5 quarts of water per grain of grist ratio in there. A little bit more, a little bit of recirculation. I would not, as you said in there, stir mash more often. I like to let my grain bed sit. When you stir up the mash, you disturb the grain bed. You're disturbing all of the settling of the grain bed and making sure that you have a really good laudable system. If you have the ability to do a Vorloff in the end, you got your mash done, you're about 45 minutes into it, do a Vorloff for 20 minutes on the end, a recirculation over the top. It's going to super improve clarity, flavor, color, condition of your beer, as well as increase the enzymatic activity because you're getting the tumble around in there. But adding enzymes to these systems is also another great way. Adding in the amylase enzymes will really help you out. Adding in protease, cellulase, beta-glucans will really help break down proteins and glucans and all that stuff in your mash. Will make the laudability better, make the flowability of your mash better. You're going to get more sugars out of there. So this is a way for you to increase the efficiency off of your Brewzilla. Basic ways to increase that: just a tiny scotch more water in there. Don't stir your grain bed, please, but do a Vorloff in there. That's going to massively improve it, as well as adding enzymes.
Yeah.
Clarifiers. I believe there is actually another question right below that.
Yeah,
Esteban! Yes. Hey guys, I'd like to use some gelatin to clarify my beer. How and when do you recommend using it? Convenient, because the next step on Brew fermentation techniques for correction is clarifiers.
To be fair, we actually don't use gelatin here because gelatin does involve a little process of heating it up to a certain temperature and getting it pre-clarified and then ready to go into your beer. We think that's too much work when there are clarifiers that are squeeze a measurement and poured into your beer ready to go. And so we actually use a combination of Kiesel salt and chitosan. I believe chitosan is the one that's the same polarity as gelatin. Regardless, one of them is. So they functionally do the exact same thing, and you can add them at two different times. So one for grabbing positive ions and one for grabbing negative ions. And those will basically take the gamut of everything that's in there. Obviously, don't add them at the same time, or else they'll cancel each other out. But add them 24 hours apart, and then they'll take everything out of your beer, especially if you do it under pressure. So, clarifiers are a great way to just make sure that you're going to get some crispies soon, or at all if you need to.
It'll also do some other things on there, like the Mexican lager, where we're getting just a little bit of yeasty character coming out of it. If there was some clarifiers added in, or is clarified out all the way through lagering, you may not be getting those characteristics coming out. It will help change the flavor of your beer into something a little cleaner and crispier. When we're adding them in is basically either before brighting, generally before brighting. Before adding CO2 and stuff like that to it. That way, if we do a long extended aging period time on it, or a lagering period, we're not aging it on lees or yeast cakes and getting any autolysis coming back or the risks of it. It helps clarify it out just a little bit more. Our process is usually cold crash, add the clarifiers in, and then go over to bright or carbonation or anything on that. Another reason I don't like to use gelatin is if you go overboard on that, you can strip flavors out. It's something that...
You still end up with haze.
Yeah. Something that I've also... if you don't care, you don't care, and that's fine. You do you. It's not something that's necessarily personally for me. But we do have a vegetarian employee that works here, and she's made comments, please tell me which beers you use certain clarifiers in, just so she's aware of it. I had a guy that didn't want a beer because it had a non-vegan clarifier in it, which is 100% fine. He can do that. I got him a different beer. I'm not upset. I don't care at all. But it got me thinking about it, because we do. It's silifine. It's the same thing as chitosan, just comes from a vegan source on that. And that's something, as a professional brewer, I started thinking about, like, oh, crap. I'm accidentally leaving a group of people out of this because I decide to use gelatin instead of chitosan and silifine or something like that.
If you use gelatin, just use whole live lobsters, I think.
Yeah. Actually, that is a beautiful clarifier, because
that's the best answer, I think.
The shell's in there. That's another, I mean, there's clarifiers all over the place. Oyster shells actually work really well. That's very similar to what chitosan is. Very similar.
It's got a lot of the same stuff on the outside.
Crab shells.
Spiders.
Spiders actually would work. Tomato bugs, the little roly-polies.
Yeah.
Those are closer in relation to, like, shrimp and lobsters than they are to bugs.
Fun Faps with Timothy.
If you want a mini lobster boil, just get a whole bunch of tomato bugs.
Wonder how that would taste.
But yeah, that's another thing that I thought about. I mean, if you're a professional brewer, that's also something to think about. You know, cool thing to put on your label. Hey, vegan beer. You know, I mean, naturally most of it is, but clarifiers is where it goes non-vegan, and that it was just, you know, something different to think about. But anyway,
we got a lot of good questions, so I'm going to rattle off the last things on this list that I don't think we need to go into a ton, but I want to get to the questions after that. The last three things we haven't mentioned yet in post-brewing techniques for correction, just making sure your beer tastes good. Filters, that goes along with clarification. Flavors or referments, that can be either extract flavors that are added to kind of build a new flavor, or referments would be like if you added a fruit and actually like a fruit with sugar content and refermented it with the sugar, with the fruit. Same thing would go with like maple syrup or brown sugar, whatever. Another level of fermentation can have the yeast help clarify things, and then blending is another option. We've talked about all those before, but to get to questions, just in case we have people coming in, let's go to the next question down the road, which was from Reverend KY. Y'all add more nuts with an umlaut. Stefan Stoudemire, how do you pronounce that? Around 40% of your fermentation. It depends on the beer or what we're doing.
And what you're intending with that. Yeah. Difficult ferments or low nutrient environments like Groth, Braggot is a little bit in that, a little bit less. Seltzer, things like that. After about a third sugar depletion, or that's kind of what he's saying, 40% instead of like 35% or 30%ish, right around in there. Yeah, that can really help out. The reason why you would do it at third sugar depletion is it really helps your yeast stay active. That would be about the point that the yeast is starting to struggle to find nutrients as well as food. You're starting to see less activity going on in there. Your krausen is starting to fall, and the nutrients can stabilize that fermentation. It's not like it's going to kick it back up and make it more vigorous, but it's going to stabilize it into a good fermentation so it can keep coasting on that.
They've also been eating pretty simple sugars up to this point, because they're going to eat the simplest sugars first and then the more complex sugars later. So it's kind of like, you know, you raise your kid from the age of 0 to 6 and he's been eating nothing but McDonald's his whole life, and then you introduce him to multivitamins. Still kind of works. It still ends up growing into a full-grown adult at some point. So
at some point. Yeah. All right. Where are you gonna? Yeah. Party Time Brewing. Anybody here try Phantasm with Thio Libre or Cosmic Punch? And thoughts? The thiolized yeast are pretty darn awesome. It's really cool to see, especially as a brewer, to see the whole process, tasting it the whole way through, and the way that it thiolizes hops, ferments out some of those terpenes and oils and stuff like that, rearranges them and makes different flavors. They're awesome. I really suggest playing around with it and taking a recipe that you know really well and works really well and applying a thiolized hop to it and seeing what happens.
Yeah. And then eventually we will probably do a video on, Ryan, if you're watching, on mash hopping with thiolized yeasts. The reason that we don't usually do mash hopping is because we want to save animals' lives and not feed them hops, and we give our grains to animals. So
Yeah.
We'll have to do that on 5-gallon batch, not on a big batch, because if we do a big batch, we definitely want to be able to feed some cows with that grain, because we get meat from that cow meat grain.
And we want them to be nice and healthy and alive to be able to provide that for us.
So that's pretty important. But we will be at some point in time probably doing a 5-gallon experiment with the 5-gallon yeasts and 5-gallon batches and mash hopping.
Yeah.
Stephen Sotomayor, not exactly sure what I'm doing wrong, but even 3-year-old fermentus packs still work fine here. Maybe the fridge is too cold. Yeah, it could be. Or you just live in a magical zone where nothing ages. You're in Never land.
Well, he's also in Germany, and fermentus comes from Austria, so he's getting very, very fresh yeast that hasn't been through many hot colds, more than likely, on that. And to go along with that, you're using dried yeast, which is extremely shelf stable. And if you're doing
even past expiration dates,
it's especially cold. And if you're doing a yeast starter on that, you really only need a couple of yeast cells to get it back up viable and going. We found that out. Some are better than others on that, but we've revived yeast that's been several years old, liquid yeast as well as dry yeast. So you're like, man, this is dumb. There's nothing left in this. And yeah, get it up fermenting and making a great beer.
Although the Neverland theory is probably more likely.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he's in Germany. I won't say that's Neverland for beer because that's kind of
a magical land.
Well, the deal about that is I'm going to say that Neverland or the Disneyland is just a little bit further east in Belgium because they're like, hey, can you imagine this? Now it's a beer because Germans are like, I mean, that's like, well, I'm trying to get a good equivalent, but it's just so goddamn tasty because they're so good at process.
What's another magical realm that people don't age in?
I know. I'm trying to think. No, not Oz, because everything I think about is a little odd and funky, and you're like, okay, yeah, that's crossing the border too. Willy Wonka, everything here is beer. That's also a little bit Belgium. But Germans are, oh my God, he lives in an amazing, perfect,
we should
the
make
good
our own
place.
Willy Wonka.
It's like the good place, and everywhere you
You
go,
start over.
just has amazing beer.
By the way, you're actually in hell.
God damn it! But it's heaven. Oh God, I'm not. He lives in an amazing, magical place that they just produce great beers and should be sending more of them to us. All of them to us. All of them to us.
Daniel, heads up, a beer drop this week is coming. Sending over something, including a smoked hazy, which I feel might need to be a tradition at this point. I'm down. Smoked hazy.
Make sure that you mark it, Matthew.
Yeah. Smoked hazy. That sounds great.
Make sure that Matt knows about it so that it doesn't get accidentally drinking without anybody else.
Scott Nutcake. Great show. Nutkick is what's on there, and just because we like mispronouncing things to irritate people like Eagle,
Nutkick,
Geek. Anyway, repitch known active yeast twice into a stuck ferment at 5 Plato, 1020 gravity, pushed air, CO2 into cone, and even another fermenting batch into the beer, but still hanging up. Any suggestions? Ya done, son.
1020 isn't that low.
Yeah. There's something in there that's...
Isn't that high, I mean.
Yeah, it's not... there's probably most hazies that are out there, especially on the professional market, are around 1020. That's not... Hey, that's a finishing gravity. Maybe not for that particular beer that you're doing. That's not an off-finishing gravity. If you have pitched known fermenting yeast into it twice and a fermenting batch, I'll comment on the other stuff in a second, you're probably done. There's probably something... toxic in that environment that's going to kill the yeast, be it alcohol, acidity, or anything like that. Some yeast are known for creating a toxic environment. A lot of diastaticus yeast do that. They're known as killer strains.
But if it was diastaticus, it'd definitely go down below 1020.
Yeah. And at the same time, you may not have sugars that you're able to ferment anymore.
You're all starch at this point.
Too complex. Maltotrios, Maltese, Maltose.
Big chain starches
that yeast can't get after. So it's not necessarily like you're done. You would either have to throw in a very powerful big pitch of diastaticus yeast, something like French Saison, or enzymes.
Add some AMG.
AMG.
Yeah. If you needed to go down lower, AMG or diastatica strains are going to be the only thing that can do it. But you might just be done.
You might just be done.
Not that high.
Honestly, at 1022, I wouldn't be afraid of throwing champagne yeast in there. It's extremely tolerant to most environments. It's a killer strain. It's diastaticus. That will ferment that sucker out dry if it is able to be fermented. If champagne yeast won't touch it, EC 1118, you're done and you can't ferment it out anymore. So,
if you're looking for a pre-ferment solution, you might just try mashing lower next time. Even if your thermometers are a little bit off, we recommend ramp mashing for a lot of people, just because if you can ramp mash, first of all, it's going to be the most consistent thing to do. Second of all, not everybody's thermometers are consistent. Even if you calibrate them, every so often, getting uncalibrated is not that hard for thermometers to do. And so if you just start a little bit low and then ramp, so let's say you start at 145 and then ramp mash to 165 as your mash out, and that covers your range pretty easily. You've got all your beta and alpha amylase working, and then you get up to a mash out temperature. So if you're looking for some what to do techniques, that'd be an option.
Thank you for calling Genus. How can I help you?
Dave Dempster, had my first experience with diacetyl from dry hopping. Tips to avoid this: increase temperature during dry hopping, or add there's a dry hop reducing or a diacetyl reducing enzyme that makes it so that your yeast can't make diacetyl in the first place. Nitrogen or aminos depletion. Barleytime Brewing didn't use enough mash hopping on my batch and 1.5 instead of 5-ish grams per liter. At Dave Dempster did a split batch, 2 beers of soda for lots of great aromas. That's a conversation that I'm not involved in, that I know of.
There's a great question towards the bottom that I'm getting the answer for.
How does one send you guys stuff? Depends on the stuff. If it's strippers, you probably got to call a local agency. Or just call Tim. He can come in.
I just posted the address.
Oh, yeah, or that address right there.
So, it's beer. He's sending us beer.
If you're sending us beer, that's the way to go.
And again, we do recommend putting Matthew on the attention too.
Yeah.
Genus, but then attention Matthew.
Yeah. If you're sending us beer, label it Matt. That way it'll get organized. Seven Sotomayor, how often do you trub dump during a fermentation on your big equipment? We will do it once, but we're very, very careful about when we do it. And it also, like I said, it kind of depends on if we're adding anything during fermentation. So if we're dry hopping, generally we're dry hopping hazies, and if we do that, we're going to be doing all that under pressure. And then we will try to trub dump 3 days after the dry hop, so very shortly before packaging. All right. Did I miss any questions? Anybody see any questions that needed answered before we start working on getting opens?
No, I was gonna say just I'll have my question for my brew day today, but that's about it. Which is, I'll ask it. What's a good, as someone who doesn't brew a lot of IPAs, what's a good hopping schedule for a classic West Coast IPA?
For a classic West Coast IPA, hopping schedule, actually the first thing that I ask is how fast you can chill down. So if you can chill down very, very quickly, meaning your chill down time is less than 10 minutes from, the end of boil to the time that you're almost ready to pitch, or like, let's say down to like 80, 90. If you can do that in less than 10 minutes, then a good West Coast hopping schedule is a classic 60. And that's going to be a good chunk of your IBUs, about half your IBUs. And then I like to go somewhere between 15 and 20, somewhere between 7 and 12, somewhere between 3 and 5, and then I like to do a flame out.
Okay.
And all those stay in there. Yeah. And they're relatively consistent for so it's a small So if I'm doing hazies, it's like small, tiny addition at 60, and then big additions at Whirlpool. If it's a West Coast, I'm doing relatively consistent additions throughout, maybe slightly bigger towards the end. But it's like the difference between like 1.5 ounces and 2 ounces for an addition, not like 0.5 ounces to 3 ounces.
Sweet, thank you.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, I figured since we're closing out, I was like, I can actually ask my question live.
Yeah,
Might
and that's a
help
good question
else.
too. What's too long to leave a high ABV beer in the fermenter? I'm at 2 weeks around 9.5%, and it's still slowly bubbling. Yeah, I don't know, 5 weeks. Just make sure it's done.
We have to break down.
I was gonna say, I would say, just from my experience,
Actually, you're live
right
right
now
Yeah.
on the internet.
like
If you
any
want
day,
to watch
if you-
yourself, you are online.
once it's done, if you just like leave it like maybe another day or two, and then you're not seeing any activity, and then
Yeah. There's no risk if you're going into the kegs. There's no risk in kegging early because you can finish off fermentation in the kegs. So if it's still slowly bubbling and you got nothing left to do, depending on the beer, if it's an IPA, obviously you want to make sure it's a low-dose transfer. As an IPA, I would recommend getting in kegs as soon as possible. Just like make sure it's under pressure and sealed and no oxygen in there. If it's a big Imperial stout, that can take a little oxygen. I'm not super worried about it.
yeah.
So you can throw a rack and cane in it and just transfer it into a keg. But if it's still going a little bit, that's totally fine. Air on this. If you don't care about a little bit of trub, a little bit of sediment in the bottom of your keg, err on the side of racking it early. It's not going to hurt nothing. If you're going into bottles, then you got the bottle bomb risk, and then it's a little bit more of a different equation. But
I don't know why you looked at me when you said bottle bomb risk. Specifically,
you might have some experience with that.
yeah.
That sounds good. Yeah.
That's one of the nice things about now starting to go professional is I won't actually be bottling.
Yeah, everything's going into kegs.
Sounds good.
All right, I think we are going into bottles.
Yeah, I would definitely then recommend a couple days after it's stopped.
Yeah.
Is going to be my recommendation as someone who.
And just for the oxygen pickup sake, I mean, assuming hopefully this isn't an IPA, hopefully it's like a stout or like an old ale or some other big beer. But I would still recommend getting in there relatively early and then just undershooting your carbonation level just a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So like let's say 4 ounces or 3.5 ounces of priming sugar if you're using priming sugar for a 5 gallon batch. Belgian golden. In that case, I would say go 5 ounces of priming sugar and then put it in a high pressure bottle. If it gets extra carbonated, that's good. That's what you want in a Belgian golden. So if you're going into a bottle that can handle high pressure, then
Yep.
don't worry about a little extra carbonation.
Nice.
And then just drink it. Don't sit on it for way too long because that's the longer you sit, the more beer you're going to lose.
But it could be more deliciouser.
Yeah.
Yeah. It could, did you talk about how, because I was on the phone for the guy, how bubbles may not be fermentation?
Yes.
Okay.
Bubbles are...
A guideline.
Yeah, they are, hey, I can kind of see something, but that could be heat temperature. That could be atmospheric pressure changing. That could be the moisture in your air doing something different. That could be your airlock just trying to tell you that it's possessed by a demon.
That could legitimately be dissolved CO2 in your beer. You get a tiny bit of evaporation out of your airlock. Now the pressure difference is enough for air to finally escape, and it's just going to keep releasing because you passed the pressure point. So you could be fermenting and have no air bubbles coming out because the way that the beer is large enough that all the CO2 is going into the beer. They're a guideline, but they tell you that there's gas escaping. It doesn't tell you that CO2 is escaping. It tells you that gas is escaping, and that's all it tells you. So, do measurements and actually have real data to do things with. Yeah.
All right, we're about to close out because we got people coming in. There are 54 people watching and only 36 thumbs up. If we do not get to 45 thumbs up by the time we close this stream out, we will not do one ever again. My fingers were crossed, but
a thumbs down, except for people with cool names. So Esteban and Stefan Studemeyer, you're safe. The rest of you need cooler names. No, that's not.
That's the only way to be
true.
safe.
But also give us can be safe.
I was gonna say, Peter, have you given the stream a thumbs up?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I
we
have.
just jumped to 42.
Woo! Good job, gang. All right, we'll see you next
Yay.
week. And I love you.
Yes.
Yes.
and we'll-
Did I say it too soon? Oh God, I said it too soon. Ah,